Howdy, y'all. We're going to talk about objects in the Sims house party. Do a quick overview, and if you're not careful, you might learn something. Nah, I'm not going to do that. So anyway, this is a guy named Mickey Gilly. He basically made country western bars what they were in the 70s and going into the 80s, especially after they had something called Urban Cowboy happen at his Pasadena club. It was a whole thing. They had a recording studio there. There was food and drink and dancing and dining, and even had David Allan Coe show up on occasion. If you know country music, you know who he is. And oh, there's the man himself, Mickey Gilly, and John Travolta from that movie in question. Basically, Mickey Gilly was a very, very popular singer and performer, sometimes songwriter, in country western music. They franchised that baby out, his baby out all over the place, Dallas and places like Las Vegas, and it was very popular, and it went all over the world. This is a mechanical bull you might find in Australia. See, look at that. A mechanical bull is an interesting thing because it slides front to back, and it swings basically like front to back, up, down, and then it spins. And so it is supposed to be simulating a bucking animal, either a bull or a bronco, in this case a bull. But oftentimes it's even crazier because it can change directions without any kind of telegraphing, which makes it even harder to stay on sometimes. So there we go. Look at that. Australia. Okay. Anyway, this was the original sketch I did before I made the template for the thing. The Sims themselves, you can see this little cross-hatched space here. This is the hips, the center of gravity. The spine goes up from there. Usually there are several bones in that. This is the kind of drawing animators and other people who are constructing people from just out of the ether will draw just to get the general shape and size of things together. You can see here this star and then this square down here. This is how we usually plan out how to get Sims into the object and out of the object. This 3x3 grid that we actually found on the mechanical bull, this is padded floor. Once a Sim moves to here, they're owned by this object. They route to this point and it says, I am now owned by the mechanical bull object. And the animation occurs where they move to here and then up to here. Once they get up here, basically they will do all the riding and all the falling off animation, and then we'll have different points where the guy falls off, boom, or girl falls off, boom, and then has to come back to this point and walk off facing out, and they'll be ready to route around and go to someplace else. But while they're inside the object, they are owned by it. This is where they live. This is their house for the moment. They aren't going nowhere. Okay, so one of the things, look at how pretty that is. All these objects are rendered. They're flat images, but they have black and white images underneath these that let the Sim know where the thing is. And so the camera taking a picture of the Sim will be looking down on this, and it will be spoofed in as if it's real 3D according to the Sim. So if the Sim were to put his hand through here, it would just go in, you wouldn't see it and come back out, because in this area it's defined as don't render anything, behind this space until it touches. So this hand comes up, it would stand here, you could put your hand on this, your sim hand on this, and it looks like it's resting on the body of the object. But really it's just hanging in space, and this is just a flat piece of art that's been chopped up in little bits. And unless you actually like start making these objects in the creator community and looking at what the objects look like stored away, you wouldn't really know. So this is how it's sold. You get fun, and look at that, you know. Oh, it's so amazing, so pretty. Look at the padding, and it looks good. One of the things we did with the art style is that we made things so that you would pay attention to the brightest and the lightest things. So this is grayish, dark gray. You're not going to pay much attention to it. You're going to pay attention to this because it contrasts with the red. But within the whole thing, there's this little red step that the sim is going to step on. So this is where they're going to move through and up. So you can see it's either the difference in color and value or saturation. The difference in color, value, and saturation behind this. Look at how muted the blue is. It's not really radiant like radioactive blue. It's just a way of styling things in your art direction brains to try and make things easier for people to really pay attention to, and to make it feel like it's something someone designed for a reason. You know, this is a step. This is not a step. So look at how pretty that is. Oh my God. It's the impinger. So great. Look at how pretty the leather is, how shined up it is, as if someone really put the time and effort to get it there. The rings on the side, there's not that much in the way, like no one shined those up, but you can tell the mechanical stuff is well taken care of. Here's the shine, you know, the brighter step. Look at that really nice sort of Cowhide effect we have going on in over the foam that people are gonna fall onto. It's just amazing and beautiful. And this leather has really good visual tooth to it. It feels like I just want to run my hand around it. So now this is from the game itself. You can see them flying through the air. You can see how this looks. It just looks natural. It just looks fun. There's a lot of good visual value to it. And then when you look at the next thing, here is the sim riding on the bull. Look at the difference between the two images. You can see, look at how pretty that is and how sort of unshaded this is. It's because it's a part of the sim. This is actually a full object, like the hands or the head or the body. See, here you have the sim head and their two hands and their body. The body is actually something that bends. The hands don't. The hands, you change them out using a process called accessory. These are the accessories, and you would use the ability for the animator to use what's called a note track. And what you do is put the equivalent of a tiny little text document within the animation, so that at frame 5, you switch from being open hand, like this, knife hand, and when he says 5, it says turn on fist, turn off blade hand, so it turns on the fist. And that's when you get this lovely little hand here looking like it's holding on to something. And the reason why it looks like it's holding on to something is because it's always adjacent to this part of the bull body. Now the bull body itself is like the hand. It's just a low polygon version of this guy. And one of the reasons why this looks so different from here to here is that it's not being lit and rendered. You know, this is something that someone at the studio like New Pencil would render out over the process of like minutes or hours to get that beautiful look on it, whereas this is just being rendered on the fly. Now, back when we were using cathode ray tube monitors, CRTs, the difference between this and this was not as great. So it would be much less of a shocking change. But since this was like basically, this was a screenshot off an LED monitor. You can definitely tell the difference, even though everything might be in generally the same place. You can see it's smaller, like it's less beautiful and less rich. Everything under it doesn't change because it's still going to be a rendered piece of 3D art. Now, when the sim gets up, you see, they're ready to start animation. They get up there, and that's the ready animation. They're going to sit there and loop, but then you saw that little pop happen? This change wasn't so great, but you lose that shading. What you do gain is the fact that they're stuck, or it looks like they're stuck on the back of the bull, when in reality, they are carrying the bull with them. The animation is this lady doing that. Her whole body is shaking, and the bull has just gone along for the ride. So it's amazing. People don't understand. So basically it was turn on the bull, turn off the bull. So turn on the bull, there it is. And you turned off the sprite section. There's a separate sprite under there that was the actual bull riding, the mechanical bull body. This is a separate object from this. And when you say turn this sprite off and turn this accessory on, the engine and the little rules in the engine say, and so you have the body that's attached to the sim, and you have the sprite that goes away. And when they fall off or they finish their ride, here we go. You're gonna watch that. You see, it's fully up, and then it turns back into that sprite. So at that point, when that happens, it turns off the accessory attached to the sim's butt, and it turns on the sprite. It's abrupt, but then again, it's running in a way that we made it so the physics was somewhat believable and fun. We didn't care as much about it being realistic as being compelling and fun. So, notice that their hand is basically holding onto the handle during this animation, but that's just because we counter animated it to be in that space the whole time. So there are all sorts of things like inverse kinematics and forward kinematics and all sorts of different things you would do with a rigged character. These are using Character Studio biped figures in what they called Character Studio, which was their animation sort of tool for trying to make character animation easier. And for a lot of products in the 90s into the 2000s, it was very successful at doing that. So you can see her get up, but when it comes down to it with these guys, these little sims, we had to use every sort of trick in the book to get these guys to work properly and make something fun and compelling. And so you can see, well, that was a really bad throw. Likewise, you almost in that last one could see them change, and the animation, we lead the sim back to the exact point where they started, but we do it so abruptly so that one frame is here and the other one's right there and stiff. It doesn't make that much of a difference as far as them being thrown. In I believe Sims 3, they made a mechanical bull, and in some ways it feels to me less compelling because it seems like they animated the two in tandem. And in a lot of cases, when you're dealing with computers and their different sort of power levels, you would say, their general graphics processor units versus their computer processing unit sort of strength, you might actually, if you have two things running in tandem, have one lag behind the other, which is one of the reasons why I've seen people try to make the heads and the bodies separate and animating side by side. At a certain point, it starts looking like a wife of Henry VIII is involved. So losing one's head, not necessarily the best thing to do. Okay, but here you go. She gets on. She starts riding. She's having a great time. You can see her kicking her feet out, but then it stops, and then you can actually, boom. See how much of a big difference that is? That was not as much of a big difference when we were using cathode ray tube monitors. So it looked a lot better, but because it was less resolution, the monitors are smaller and tighter, so the darkness change wasn't as great. And then you can see her getting off. So she got on facing the thing, and she got off. Look at that. So she rides successfully, and then it slows down and rests, and boop. Accessory changes, tracks down, and then she walks off facing away. So this, in essence, is the way a lot of things work. And in this case, it's a single-person object, but it's a single-person object with a mostly convincing accessory that they're interacting with. When it comes down to things that people are doing with other Sims, those require more of a handshake when you get together, like things like the bed and the hot tub. You can have a person in the bed. The person gets in the bed, but the person who got in first has to be in a cycle waiting, looping for the other person to get there. So anyway, what a great ride. Okay, so we made this mostly Western, somewhat country, but mostly Western themed, like not quite a Hootennany, more like a do. And we wanted to make it look like you were either in some sort of rumpus room that someone tried to make look like a saloon, or a theme restaurant or something where someone took the time and paid the money to have someone professionally build the pieces of furniture and other accoutrements for it. So this was, you can tell it was mechanical. You can tell it's a fairly high quality thing because of how much it looks like it was stitched together with Naga hide and with really good padding that you'd see in like bus cushions, so it's sturdy. So here we go. We wanted there to be that kind of visual tooth. Each time we made something for people to interact with, we used that same art direction process of making something that was a different value, a different temperature, a different saturation than the object itself. In this case, we made the wood grain go generally in good directions. We made it so that the door and the side panel, etc., aren't necessarily going in the same direction, but they're going in a good direction. In this case, it looks like these were hand carved instead of just being veneer, which is kind of, a cop out sometimes. But, and, when people are using these things, they can actually get their good effects with them, but it's going to be a mimic of the previous bar. The previous one like this was in Living Large, and it had bamboo on the sides, which was kind of early for our bamboo theme, which comes in later in this video in the form of the Hawaiiana, Polynesiana tiki sort of space. Now we move on. Here's the Ornery Owl Pioneer bookcase. It's called the Ornery Owl because in the area where we did the Sims initially, and then subsequently people were still living on the peninsula, San Francisco Bay, lower peninsula, and there was a company called Hoot Judkins, which had an owl mascot. So, and likewise with these things, we wanted there to be enough interest in here, so a bowl, an actual hat like this. This is actually Eddie Brothers. So this is considered vintage, but I wanted there to be a presence in there of Native Americans. So this is actually supposed to be Red Cloud, who was a thorn in the side of the encroaching Americans on the Sioux Nation and who survived the wars they had with the U.S. Army, etc. So, you know, it's a bit of a thumb in the eye, but a good-natured thumb in the eye. And you can tell the difference. It doesn't quite look like what was drawn, but, you know, we know. We know. So, sometimes, you know, when you get these things, you'll have two separate artists work on something. Like this is not exactly in the same style as this. It's close, but as we got farther in on things, we ended up making it so that the suites of objects, as we called them, were handled, if not by the same person, that they had the same kind of style cues and could reuse some of the same motifs in the objects. Like if you look at this and then you go back and you look at the other object, like just the drawing of the object, it was a little more of an antiquarian thing with, you know, those spaces in it. And they got the doors on there, and there's the hat, but the bowl went away in favor of, I guess, a horse. And the hat isn't sort of like pointing in the direction it would be to show it's a really, you know, it's really a cowboy hat. All right, so, and we move on to other things like campfires. And I was actually in the Scouts for a while, and I worked at a camp in the Sierra Nevada. And I was for a while, I was the person in charge of the campfires. So I know my way around fire and camp. And so this was a really good thing for people to sit down next to. And I think at a certain point you can pull out a guitar and start playing it. This is something I did 20 years plus later. This is my own little fire pit that I made for a separate company when they wanted a fire pit done. So you can see the embers rising up and the little sparks popping off. And I think you can actually see the logs move when the pop happens, just to try and get that naturalistic thing going on there. We didn't have that ability to do in The Sims, but since I was working in Unreal Engine 5 and with Maya instead of 3D Studio Max, I rigged this whole thing and ran it like a regular special effect. It turns out that it was not as painful as some of the other things people were making. So here's our own campfire, and they are wearing a guitar. When I say wearing, it means that's an accessory, just like the hands, just like the head that we mentioned before, and it's attached to the body so that they can strum or pick and move their other hand on the strings to make chords. And unless you're a real guitar player, you won't know that they're not actually playing chords. It looks like they're moving and might be playing, you know, different chords. So it's really convincing for what it is. You know, a lot of the things we did and planned were more like theme park animatronics than they were like trying to simulate something. It was an emulation. So, you know, when a guy is in the Pirates of the Caribbean playing, you know, his accordion, or someone is, you know, singing or playing on a guitar, they're rocking, and the motion that goes along with it feels natural because it's slightly different. So it looks like the accordion's being pulled and pushed. In this case, the guitar they're rocking with the guitar, but they don't really need to be spinning it or doing anything with it because the hands are moving and they're rocking a little bit, and so it's convincing. Or at the very least, it's interesting enough for people. So this is kind of like what we started with, trying to get things to look like a bar, or trying to look like that Rumpus room, which is simulating a bar, where we have barrel chairs. In this case, this is a different thing that we went with because it's the barrel cut in half and then stacked end on end and reconnected. And then this is actually a really clever way of doing it, and we didn't do it that way because we wanted it to be more of an feel of more of an armchair instead of a captain's chair, because captain's chairs are things of our youth that we despised a lot of cases. We had conversations about this kind of thing, about captain's chairs, and how a lot of us had the captain's chairs in our dining nooks, and they were a pain in the butt because they all had arms and they're all low. And if you're tired, you couldn't lean back because you'd start falling over to the side. So this is the Harris Ranch in Coalinga, California. You can see all these beautiful cowhide things. If you had a burger here, it probably came from the feed lot, which is like a mile away. And mostly you can't smell the feed lot here. Hey, look, there's a moose, but it's not telling you, you know, the moods. But you can see all these little lovely pieces of the cowhide, and you can see the hair and the rolled arm, which is something you'll see in other things like Unleashed with my favorite couch. But this is Harris Ranch. If you were going to LA on Highway 5 from the San Francisco Bay Area, where a lot of us lived and worked, you could stop here and get a burger or a steak, and then continue on. You can see here, this is back by the restrooms. Behind me while I'm sitting here, I believe, is where the dining room is and the coffee shop. And then over here to the right is the candy store and the souvenir area. So likewise, there are places like Sam's Town that were inspiring to us. I actually got invited to a wedding that I wasn't able to attend there by a bunch of rockabilly people because they love that sort of twangy music, that the Western swing, that, you know, I like it too. What can I say? This is fun because it's kitschy, because inside this area here where the casino is and in the hotel there, the atriums have astroturf and like plastered deer and things. And they have cabooses and other stuff around the area, so it definitely feels like you're in the Western town kind of theme. So there's our cow. This is the couch. Country lounger. It goes with the couch country sofa. I like the country lounger better because I think the treatment's a little bit better on here. You can see the hair on the hide, the rolled arm, and the studs just pop more because of how they're placed on the different edge here. It looks like this was, you know, may have been made by a different person, because you can see how the rolled arm just comes straight back and this one tapers maybe a little bit, or maybe it's just the color, but it just doesn't feel like you can see. There's a lot of white there, and then it's on the edge instead of the front. Actually, that's not true. Sorry, those are cushions. But like the edge here and then the edge down here going up again, there's no way to tell what's going on. I guess just the scale and the size. Not quite a fair assessment. Here's the barrel chair we mentioned before. So it's got that upholstered feeling on it. I really wish there were a different lip than the studs here. But like I said, I didn't, in this particular product, I didn't have as much say because it was just being pushed out and pulled back. Who does not like a bear made of a log or a stump with a chainsaw? I've used one too. We'll talk about that later with the tiki stuff. But yeah, carving. Oh, see, now if you are having a Hootennany or a hoedown, it's always good to have extra seating and places to put your paper plates with your beans and your different chops or your different burgers or whatever, hot dogs. Okay, this is fun because we made this so that it could be used as a bar. And this back here is chicken wire, so the little hexes. And behind that are little curtains like you would if you had a pie safe, which is where you put baked goods to cool when you don't want pilfering little animal or children's or even adult hands touching it. You want to set it on the windowsill and have someone grab it off, or if it fall down into the dirt outside. Okay, when I was a kid, we had these things in certain houses in certain development areas because there definitely was a Western theme for all these ranch houses people had. Some of them had these things embedded in brick walls, and it was really fun. Although the houses, it was kind of funny because you'd go through the yard and you'd have, you know, split rail fences and not cactus but junipers and well, sometimes cactuses too. And then you get into the porch area and it'd still be turned wood and, you know, stuff. Then you get inside and it would be same old linoleum floor, tile counters. Just pretty disappointing 70s 80s stuff. This is also nice if you want to create a barrier and you want to create visual space. Look at that. It's just, I think this may be the same set of horns that came off of the bowl, but look at that. It's so pretty. The leather and the wood and the horn, a little shine on it. It's lovely. Okay, that thus ends the lesson. We'll talk about characters in another section, but thank you for your kind attention. I'll talk to you later.